Did they have to shoot the endangered gorilla to save the little boy? And who's to blame for the recent tragedy at Cincinnati Zoo's Gorilla World? I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, and this is Right Angle, brought to you by members of BillWhittle.com. Well, men, by now, most of the developed world knows that a 4-year-old boy tumbled into the gorilla habitat at the zoo, and many have seen the terrifying video of the 420-pound simian dragging the boy through the water at frightening speed. But a debate rages on social media and elsewhere about whether the zoo made the right call in fatally shooting Harambe the gorilla. The child escaped, by the way, with a concussion and other minor injuries. Many say that the video shows the beast actually exhibiting protective behavior, shielding the child with his massive body, even holding his hand. They've suggested that the screaming zoo visitors may have seemed like a threat to the boy, and that Harambe's aggressive action was meant to get the child to a safe place. Some gorilla experts said the appropriate reaction would have been to negotiate with the primate, drawing him away from the boy with fruit or other treats. But that's not the only debate over primate psychology. Many wonder how the mother could be so distracted, so negligent, that her 4-year-old could tumble 10 to 15 feet into harm's way. Others ask whether our efforts to give zoo creatures more natural surroundings rather than cages has come at the risk of human life, and in this case, of animal life. Could a second fence have made a difference? Did the zoo even have a plan other than shoot to kill to address such a crisis? Well, Stephen Green, you have a couple of juvenile sentient primates who've seen the zoo a time or two, from what I understand. How does this incident concern you as a parent, and what's the most worrisome aspect of it?
Oh boy, first I have to address this as an animal lover. You know, I was so lucky as a kid. I grew up in St. Louis, and the St. Louis Zoo was the first in, I think, the world to have natural type settings for animals instead of just cages. It was built in 1903 for the '04 World's Fair, and it was groundbreaking. It was marvelous, and about the time I was my older son's age, 9 or 10 years old, they hugely expanded this thing with what's called Big Cat Country, which is a huge set of completely natural, lifelike enclosures for the big cats. And growing up, it was one of my favorite places to go, and it still is. If you like zoos, treat yourself. Go to the St. Louis Zoo. It really is still, to this day, one of the best in the world. So, I mean, we are animal lovers. We space out our dogs so that when one dies, we always have at least one or two backups. I've got a cat that I keep, even though I don't like him, because I love animals and I've got to fill my house with animals. That's the first thing. And the important thing to remember is, despite this tragedy, no matter who is to blame, zoos perform a great function when it comes to conservation. We know so much more about animals, their behaviors, their habitats, their health, and how to protect them than we ever did before we had zoos like the modern zoos we have today. So that's the thing we have to remember. This was a terrible thing, having to shoot that ape, and I'm not qualified. I wasn't there. I didn't see it. So I'm not qualified to say it was the right call or not for the zoo to make. Boy, I'm sorry. It does get to me. And the mom, you know, you got to let your kids loose. You've got to let them loose. You've got to have free-range kids, but you've also got to keep your eye on them. You've got to have that eagle eye all the time. And, wow, you know, as a mom, whether or not her child was actually in danger, this gal took her eyes off the prize there for just long enough for this terrible tragedy to occur. And I don't know if there's I don't know if there should be anything legal action taken against her or anything like that, but I hope that this does haunt her and make her a more observant mom for just ever.
Well, Bill Whittle, you know, you can always second guess events from the comfort of your own living room, but I wonder what the reaction might have been had the ape lived and the child died.
Well, there's a lot of really interesting things on the table with this, Scotty. It's actually a great question. The kind of reason I like this show, because it's fun to look at some ethical issues that don't have to do with, you know, just exactly how corrupt Hillary Clinton is. And also, I'd like to say that I'm glad that we're not doing this in the Catskills, because if we would, we'd be like, you know, crowd goes ape over shooting in the zoo. There's a lot here. The first thing I think that I want to say is probably the thing you have to get out of the way first, and it's probably the toughest one, and that is, no matter how magnificent these animals are, I think human life comes first, and I think that is just something you just have to start with.
Yeah.
Apes are extremely intelligent. We know Coco had developed sign language and was able to express emotions, understood concept of self, understood concept of ownership and gratitude and all these other things. So we need to treat these animals with a great deal of respect. But if it comes down to a human life versus a gorilla life, the child is already more mentally advanced than the gorilla will ever be, and while there are billions and billions of humans and just a few hundred of these great apes, in my opinion, the human life takes precedence, and I think that just has to be said in terms of the actions of these guys. Secondly, I've heard enough stories of apes protecting people that I was just appalled that they shot this animal. I mean, on some level, it's kind of as trigger happy as sometimes you see some police are. Look, take a police standoff, for example. These guys are in real danger, and I don't begrudge policemen any of the danger that they go through, and I almost always assume the police is right. But every now and then, you'll see a man who's got a knife, and he's 40 feet away, and he'll start walking, and they'll just drop him when, frankly, maybe you could have negotiated your way out of that without endangering the police officer. So I don't know. It seems like they shot a little fast on this one. I do have something I do want to say about the idea of zoos, though, very quickly. When I was a little boy, I went to the Central Park Zoo, and I was completely enthralled and delighted to see a Bengal tiger in a cage that was about the size of the Bengal tiger. Honestly, wasn't much bigger than that. And here's an animal that's used to, roaming through the wild in India, in New York, in the winter, in a cage the size of it, and I thought it was terrific. I don't think it's terrific anymore. No. And here's what I think is interesting, that maybe give us some sense for the future. When I was a boy and saw that Bengal tiger in the zoo, I'd never seen a tiger before, and it's an impressive animal. And then when I was a little older in Bermuda, they had us watch a series called Africa. It was probably in the mid-'70s, but it was a documentary about Africa. It was the first really conclusive, comprehensive wildlife documentary of Africa. And then as time gets on and on, we see more and more video, and then there's Animal Planet, then there's Wild, all this other stuff. And so what I'm trying to say is, I think the original purpose of zoos was to introduce people to these exotic animals that they'd never seen before. Certainly in Europe in the end of the 1800s, never seen an elephant, never seen an ostrich. We don't have that excuse anymore. We now have HD footage of these animals in their natural habitat, and every single time that the viewing through video gets better and better and better, I feel like the need for actual zoos is lower and lower and lower, with one exception. And this exception takes care of the animals. If the zoo is in fact providing a refuge for endangered animals, and especially if it's an open range zoo or something like that, there's a place in Florida, used to be anyway, called Lion Country Safari. They've got hundreds of lions there, and it's Florida, which feels like Africa, and they all seem to be pretty happy. So if you're protecting endangered species, I'm in favor of it. But generally speaking, I become more and more concerned about these videos that we see of animal emotional intelligence, of cows that have been released from a stall and they're roaming around in the field, and they're literally galloping around and they're nuzzling their people, and there's a panda, playing in the snow and rolling down a hill. There's a bulldog that runs up a hill and just rolls down and runs up and rolls down again. There's a cockatiel that's dancing to the music. My great hope and my great horror is that these animals are far more sophisticated than we ever gave them credit for, and we're beginning to understand now that these are in fact, if not people, then certainly personalities.
Hey, Bill, let me throw something in there real quick. I feel your pain on badly run zoos. I really do. But if you want to treat yourself, since it's in your neck of the woods, head down to San Diego. Their zoo is just legendary. An amazing
it's legendary.
Place. It really is.
Well, I'm going to do the whole thing with holograms from in my own bedroom. I'm just going to have like a VR headset on and have 4K.
Wasn't that a Ray Bradbury story?
Well, listen, as Bill indicates, no one wants to go back to the old zoos with animals incarcerated in tiny cages. And incidents like this one are exceedingly rare. The zoo will most likely, almost certainly, add another layer of protection before reopening Gorilla World, and that'll inspire other zoos around the country to do the same. But anyone who's had children knows that kids are quick and clever, and you can't put a child guard cap on everything. Rather than leap into judgment mode with limited third-hand information, perhaps what we should see here is a cascade of good intentions. The conservationists display an endangered species to connect with human hearts and foster further preservation efforts. Zoo leaders create more humane habitats for the good of the animals and to let people see what they look like in their native lands. A mom takes her children to the zoo to bring them delight and to help them learn and to make memories that last a lifetime. Panicked people scream in horror, perhaps trying to scare off the gorilla and save the child. The ape itself apparently stands watch over the child, but then whisks him away from the chaotic scene as best he knows how. Emergency responders and the zoo director make the tough decision and deliver the kill shot to spare a 4-year-old boy from further injury or death. And now, a caterwauling of social media know-it-alls blame the parents, blame the zoo, blame the shooter as they play Monday morning quarterback with their remote expertise based on a few seconds of video. It's easy to make a decision after the fact when you're not the one accountable for the outcome, as Steve suggested. The truth of the matter is that most of us make the best choices we can moment to moment. But we're all flawed creatures, prone to mistakes. Most of us will revisit tough decisions for days, weeks, even years. But you have to do what seems best to you while something can still be done. On the other hand, Twitter Man knows that he'd never let a child get out of his sight. Twitter Man knows that he would have brokered a deal with the aggressive ape to trade the child unharmed for a basket of passion fruit and a soothing back rub. Twitter Man would certainly have spared the life of the innocent gorilla and secured the child from harm. Well, if you're like Twitter Man, I invite you to review the catalog of crises in your own life. Tell me if there's anything you might have done differently. And if you've never made a mistake or a misjudgment in a crisis, and you've never wished for a do-over, and you've never had to ask for forgiveness, well then, what am I doing here? I should be kowtowing and genuflecting in your driveway and building a monument to your divinity. For Bill Whittle, Stephen Green, and the Right Angle team, I'm Scott Ott. Thank you for watching. If you like what you see here, imagine unlocking the full treasure of liberty-loving content with your membership at BillWhittle.com. It's those members who made this possible.